Okay, hello, good morning. Maybe we should just dive right into this. And I thought maybe a good intro for each session is that we kind of summarize what we're trying to do. So at Codesandbox, some of the the current state of the project is that we move from Redux to Cerebral, from Cerebral to Overmind. And the challenges we overcame doing that is that we don't have a bunch of boilerplate anymore. We don't have logic and state split across components and Redux in this case, but like the state management, it's the state management itself is like the application, and the components are purely UI related. And then our code discoverability is way better because we have TypeScript. It's also now possible to understand how Codesandbox works because we have co-located state and logic to some extent, and we also have the dev tools, not least of changes we made. And we also have a strong concept of effects. So everything that's related to doing something outside of Codesandbox is called an effect and has its own API. So that's awesome. We don't have like any exotic APIs. The only exotic thing in Codesandbox now is that we have like reactive values, which means that if you write mutation, under the hood, it actually creates a reaction. This is like how MobX and Vue and also Overmind works. And we don't have bad TypeScript support anymore. But we still have some challenges, and that's what we're diving into now. We have to organize our code differently in terms of strict null checking. We have to figure out that whenever we want to work with some entity or some value, in a context, we want that context to know if the value is there or not. So we don't have to constantly check if the value is there. So this, the main example here is a sandbox. We have a lot of logic now with strict null checking on where we need to check if the sandbox is really there. When we as humans know that it's there. But we still have this state and logic decoupling. We can make it way more coupled to increase the discoverability. We don't have any concept of private and public logic, so everything's public. And we don't deal with async race conditions very well. And I think, as I mentioned in previous stream, I think this is a general thing. It's basically that we don't dispose of stuff. Like we move between all these different contexts and we don't dispose of where we were, especially if something asynchronous is happening there. So a very simple example would be we're moving from one sandbox to the next sandbox. And we're just doing that even though the other sandbox is still doing some asynchronous work. And that can lead to all sorts of things. There's tons of scenarios like that, and this is very typical in applications that we don't deal with this. And then we also have this resetting of state. Since we don't have this strong co-location of logic and state, we have situations where we have some state that's related to a sandbox, and then you move to a new sandbox, but we did now this other thing has state related to the previous sandbox and stuff like that. We need to deal with that. And then there are some concepts we want to realize, which is really this idea of thinking isolated features. Personally, I've never worked on a project where we think isolated features, but I've seen many projects that does that. And the reason I haven't liked that much is because they aren't really isolated features. They depend on other features, typically. So you need a way to deal with that. And what's interesting is that we want this editor on top, and this editor is not a dev tool, it's an actual editor. And the editor, the state of the editor is the code. So there's no metadata anywhere. It's like it the editor reads your files and then produces the UI. And when you start manipulating the UI in the editor, it writes code back, and then it reads that code again, and that produces the new state of the editor. And then we are exploring that apps are not really trees. As I said, if you have a tree where you have a folder of features, it's not like every feature is in complete isolation. You might have sibling features that depend on each other. So it's more like a graph than a tree. So files and folders doesn't give you that insight. You have to read import statements and stuff. But we're building something that actually gives you that insight. Yeah, and then we want this editor, as I said, it just reads the code, so the application doesn't need to run. But when it runs, it populates the static representation with runtime information. We saw that in the last stream. All right. Are we okay here? Okay, good. Okay, so we played around with this to-do and the to-do storage. But I thought we could just drop this stuff and start looking into Codesandbox. And as we do that, we'll also look more into the concepts that helps us with our challenges. So let's, I think I can just remove all of this. It's pretty cool. Like I can just play around there and it actually updates the, it's deleted. Yeah, we don't have this anymore. Okay, cool. So what I thought we could do first is that we can take a look at the API of Codesandbox, because we need to talk to the server. And the question is like, how do we create an API feature? An isolated feature that can talk to the server. And what's interesting about that is that this feature isn't only about having like just using fetch to talk to the server. It has the complexity of dealing with the environment. So the URL to the server might be different based on the environment you're running. And also you have authentication. If you are authenticated, it needs to add a header to all the requests. But if you're not authenticated, it should not add that header. So, and that what's interesting about that is that is certainly like the API feature shouldn't deal with authentication. That should be its own feature. And also I want the environment itself to be a feature. So we have these three concepts and I want them to be separate, but the API needs to deal with both authentication and the environment. So let's see how that could look like. And I'm going to try to find let's see if I can find I have some Codesandbox code here. Let's see if I can find our API. So we have this API factory. Yeah, and here you can see what we need to do in Overmind to provide information about your authentication. Is that when we initialize Overmind, we initialize all the different effects and we pass them functions to extract state. So we don't only like get an instance of the API, we also have to explicitly initialize it, which is not ideal because we had an issue the other day when one of the other developers at Codesandbox was looking at this and didn't understand like where does this provide JWT token come from, and that makes total sense. But anyways, as we can see here, it's creating the authorization header, given that we actually have a JWT token. Okay, so let's model this up. So we have, and there's also a question like, what should the responsibility of the API feature be? Should it be to only expose, should it be API endpoint for example, meaning that should it only expose like get, set, get, post, patch, delete methods, and then it does deal with the authentication and everything underneath and the environment and all that, so it deals with that for you. But all features that wants to talk to the server or needs data from the server or needs to send data to the server, they have to explicitly set the URL and everything by themselves. Or do we want like an API feature where we have a bunch of methods for like get sandbox, update sandbox, blah, blah, blah. And I don't have any like very specific, I wouldn't argue like very hard against having like an API endpoint, but I think it's valuable to have like API because you just get these convenience methods. So instead of writing like get, then you have to know the URL for getting a sandbox. And there might be like options there, which is queries, and you would have to know about this when using it inside a feature. But now we can actually implement the API, we can look at the server, we can like focus on implementing this correctly and exposing methods for convenience methods for doing different things with the API. It would also later be easier to do things like caching and stuff, I guess. Anyways, we have our API. We don't want this to be like a factory. We only want one instance of the API. And maybe what we can do first is to implement a way for us to make the requests. And this is where we go into like private and public logic. So if I edit this, I really want this feature to have this private method, because I want to use the fetch API of the browser, but I don't want to use it like there's some reuse. I can make it more expressive because we know that all responses are JSON and stuff like that. So I want a private fetch, and then I want to do, let's see, I want to have a type called tRequest. And then, for example, for get, there's no data here, but there might be a query, and that should be, let's see, a tRequest query. Let's call that type as well. And that should be like key string, and it needs to be a string. Or it could be like a post where we have some data. The question is, what should the data type? I wish there was like a native type for JSON. That would be sweet. I'm just typing object here. I'm not sure if this is the thing we should use, but let's just do that for now. And yeah, so basically we can actually use a query on any of these. So we can rather type it like this. So query and one of these. And the reason I do this is now it will type this correctly. So for example, if we say get sandbox, sandbox ID is a string. And what this should return is something called iSandbox DTO. And this is also something, in my experience, we don't do very often. Is that we separate the type for, well, maybe we do. I don't know. It's a tricky thing because you have this data object coming from the server, which represents something very concrete in your app, but you don't want that thing to be the thing you have in your app. You want to do something with it. What I mean is like a sandbox, for example, it has some data, but we want to add some client-side properties to it. That's only related to running in the client. So we're kind of extending it. We also want, in this case, we're going to locate the logic for dealing with the sandbox as well. But at the core, we kind of need this. We need to represent a type that tells us what is actually coming from the server. So let's export interface iSandbox DTO. Yes. And DTO is like data transfer object. Why is it complaining? Oh, it's just that we need to return something. Okay, so this private fetch thing takes a T request. And we also need a generic here because we're going to return a promise of this, whatever type, whatever we expect to come back here, we're going to get back. So we're going to, of course we also need a URL here. Or we're going to use path actually, because this API feature knows, will use an environment feature to find the actual URL to the API. And then we just use the path. So request.path. So we haven't added the URL here yet. We'll do that. And then we have method request.type. Oh, maybe we should call it method. Method. And then we're going to do, what is it? Body? Or maybe we can, oh yeah, let's do this a little bit differently. So, how should we do this? How should we do this? How should we express this? So we can switch on the method so that we can, what we want is that we want to kind of ensure that we deal with each method correctly. And I guess we can just do URL equals something plus the path. And then the query would be if the request has a query. We want to stringify that query. We need a library for that. But let's just do this for now. Or it's undefined. And then we have data, and that, yeah, and this needs to be, we might not have data. It depends on the request method. But this is like, we don't know what this is. I'm not sure if unknown is the right type. I might be like really confused here now. I'm not sure if I'm writing this out the correct way, but let's just do it. And then we have, yes, and we have method. So we can say method, and this will be body, query. What are you complaining about? Oh yeah. Then response to JSON. Yeah, because body should be body init. And query should be string. Oh yeah. Okay, so let's just make it a string. Why is it complaining? Request init. It doesn't? Oh, of course, sorry. This is part of the URL, of course. Sorry. So we'll check if we have that. If we have that, we're going to include it. And if not, we're not going to include it. Okay, something like that. And then, yeah, maybe we can even make this better. So if request method equals post, then you see we have the correct typing here, and then we'll just JSON stringify this. Or if we don't have anything there, we'll do undefine. Yeah, okay, so now we're getting somewhere. I'm not sure if I hear popping. Yeah, query is an object. And we need to stringify that object into a proper query string. And typically I use a npm package for that. Maybe I can just install it. npm query string. Oh, 9 million. This has to be useful. But yeah, let's just install this. So we'll import query string, and the point is we just want to stringify. So this is what we want to do. Stringify request.query. Now the whole point of this, we're actually going to implement things, so it takes a little bit of time, but it's nice to just look at this as well. So this is really not related to all the concepts we're talking about. This is hard implementation, but I think it's important that we actually make something run. So the point here is that now I have private and public logic for my API, which means that I can say this fetch, and the path would be something like, let's see, I think this is the path, sandbox ID, and then I can give it iSandbox DTO. I know I'll get that back, and the method would now be get, and we don't have any query stuff on that. So let's do it like this. There we go. Okay, so to kind of get back to our the stuff we're trying to solve, as I said, this API should have a notion of the environment, but there are many things in Codesandbox that needs to know about the environment. So we want to make that a feature in itself, dealing with the environment that Codesandbox is running in. So what we're going to do is add a new feature that's called environment. And one thing to point out there, you see that we didn't get our fetch method here. It's private. So we don't see that in the editor, because the editor is about, well, basically the stuff that you need to care about as a developer when you implement new stuff and kind of get the gist of how the application works, while private is like under the hood. Okay, so we have our environment. So the question is, how should that work? So first of all, we don't have like multiple environments. We don't have to instantiate multiple environments. We only have one. So it doesn't need to be a factory. What we want to do is basically take a look at well, environment variables, and then expose some properties that can be used by the other features. So what we can do here is we can take a look at this. Oh, npm link. Every time I install a new package, I need to link back the library. Anyways, so what we want to expose here is like the endpoint, API endpoint. And this should be a string. And what we're going to do is that when this environment is instantiated, which happens automatically when some feature grabs it, we want to take a look at the environment. So what we could do is, yeah, we could be quite explicit about this. We could say process.node, and node env. How did we, there's something like declare window, what was that? TypeScript, declare global variables, blah, blah, blah. Oh, declare var process. Okay, and that should be like env, and that's a string. Oh, no. Node env, and that's a string. There we go. Okay, so now we can take a look at, well, I guess we can type this out. So it should either be development, or it can be, well, I guess we can make like an enum of this. Export enum env. So it can be development, which equals development. Production equals production. Let's not go all that crazy with this. And then we can say, well, I guess this is, let's call it env. And now we can rather switch on this, and now we should have like env development, do this, and if it's env production, do this. So what we want to do is we want to assign this. So this would be, let's just use Codesandbox io/API. And I won't put the slash at the end. I like to use the slash. So, so I like this slash in front. Because it kind of indicates that it's a URL path for some reason. I don't know why I think that way, but that's the way it's going to be. Okay, so it doesn't matter which environment it is for now, but you can see how this would work. Now, so now we have a feature called environment, which is responsible for exposing a set of properties related to the environment. And this is actually quite complex in Codesandbox. We have a ton of different environment variables and stuff, but now you kind of get a very clear sense of how that's working. And we could also expose methods here if we wanted to do that, or getters if we needed to do that, and so on. But now the fun part is that we want our API to depend on our environment. So we'll just attach it there, and bippity boppity boo, we have access to the environment in our API. And what the code did now is that it actually added a property called environment, which is a type of environment. And make notice here that we're not actually importing the environment class itself. We're importing the type, which means that this is removed and this is removed. This is removed in the runtime. So there won't be any like circular dependencies type of things. And then we actually inject a feature here. The initial version of this tool used decorators, but the story of decorators is quite icky. I don't trust that it's actually coming into the language. It's even MobX is pushing away from it. So yeah, this is, and I don't want like a ton of setup and stuff to make the tool work. So yeah, it works like this. Anyways, so the interesting thing is like, even though I visually created this dependency now, if I were to remove this code, oh, didn't I implement that? Anyways, if I refresh, yeah, Yeah, I haven't implemented removal of dependencies on file change. Anyways, the point is, if I were to add this code manually, you see that it does the same thing. So there's nothing special about doing things in the editor. It always writes code, and the state of the editor is what the code represents. So that's kind of the visual tooling I think we need. And that's what we're pushing at the Codesandbox as well. As we're moving on as a company, this is the kind of development tooling we're aiming for. Like, not this explicitly, this editor and stuff, but the concept of the code being the state of the visual tool, so that the code is in complete sync with whatever you're seeing visually. Anyways, I'm rambling on. So let us use our new environment now. So what I can do is, on the URL, I can now say this environment API endpoint. And there we have it. So whatever environment we're running in now, it will change this. Okay, cool. So that's it for the API for now. So let's talk about the authentication, because as we talked about, if there is a JWT token available, we want to add that as a header, right? But authentication isn't really the responsibility of the API. That needs to be its own feature. And it's quite an interesting thing, because authentication has different states, and you want to guard those states so that you can't be, for example, authenticating while you are authenticated and stuff like that. So we want to use a state machine for that. A state machine works really well for that concept. So now we get into the concept of like capabilities. So all these nodes or these classes are considered features, but they can add capabilities. Or have added capabilities. So for example, it can be a factory, as we talked about last time, or it can be a state machine, or it can be a factory that is also a state machine. That's the point of capabilities. It's not one, you can have many. And then there's something called view, which we can take a look at some point. It was just something I experimented with, because there are certain parts of the UI in Codesandbox that could benefit from not using React, because we really need the performance of doing minimal stuff. Like, it's not a complex UI, we don't really need React for it. What Vue does, it exposes a tool for building UIs and binding observable values to it. And then we have Event Hub, which is basically, it's just an event hub. Yeah, we can look at that later. Let's take a look at our, let's call it authentication, or auth. For it, yeah, it's kind of authorization, authentication. And what's interesting about the auth feature is that to be able to authenticate, we need to use the API, but the API needs to use our auth feature to decide if a JWT token should be there or not. And this is something, and then you can argue, then you're doing it wrong, right? Then you're organizing your code wrong. But I argue that it's better to have the capability to express that kind of thing, because it is a circular dependency. But what dependency injection allows you to do is to have that kind of circular dependency. So yeah, we're going to do that now, and we're going to implement it. And yeah, it's really interesting, because as I said, like when we look at the files and folders, it's like a tree structure, and you don't get any sense of how things depend on each other, which we do in this concept. And we even see that things can like have circular dependencies, And again, as I said, like you can argue that then you're organizing it wrong. But I don't think so. The world isn't a tree. The world isn't this super organized thing where everything kind of fits perfectly in isolation. The world is kind of messy. And we are messy. And that doesn't mean like our code needs to be messy, but we need to allow for how should I explain this? This is getting way like philosophical, but we need a way to express this messiness without like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're trying to move towards this pure world in code, but some of the things we need to do, it just isn't pure. Like as if pure is such a perfect means that you have the right answer. Yeah, like if you can do something in a pure manner, like you don't have circular dependencies, you don't do mutation and stuff like that, then suddenly you have the right solution. That's not how the world works. You do want mutation, you do want circular dependencies, because that's the best way to deal with what you have in front of you. Anyways, sorry, I'm completely just rambling. So let's start by let's start by implementing the auth thingy. So let's make it a state machine. And what happens? Yeah, I'm curious if that escalated quickly. Sorry, Bogdan. Yes, the Electron app is part of the library itself. You don't have to use it. You don't have to use it, and you can like use the library itself, and then you can start the editor later and continue from there. As I said, the state of the editor is the code. So yeah. Anyways, let's look at the auth feature. And as I said, let's look at it first. So when you add the state machine capability to a feature, it has it's a first class concept, so it's able to identify like what is the current state of the state machine. You see that it adds an observable state property, and then you have something called onMessage, which we're also going to take a look at. Oops, I have some old code here. Sorry about that. Let's fix that right away. Where are you, reactive app? There you are. Editor. So this is the implementation of the thingy. I think here we have, where are you? No, it has to be here. What's it called? Toggle mixin. Here we are, state machine. Blah, blah, blah. Insert type alias tMessage state. Here we go. There it says decorators. By the way, the tool I'm using to update the code is called ts-morph. It's amazing. Again, like the TypeScript tool for dealing with ASTs and writing code based on ASTs is immutable and functional, which is the correct way to do it. ts-morph is not that. It's kind of immutable under the hood. Like it does use the TypeScript tool under the hood, but it exposes a mutable API, which makes it so much easier to work with. Like I would never have the motivation or the patience to implement this without ts-morph. It could never happen. As you can see here, I can just say, go grab the class. So this is the source file, this is the file, and I just say, get the class that has the name of, auth in this case. So now I have this class thing, and I can say, okay, just add a property to that class called state. And the type, just write it in as a string, I don't care. In the initializer, which means the value, again, just write it in as a string. I don't want to build nodes and stuff with this. And then, okay, I want some decorators. Well, I don't, so I'll remove that. But yeah, tsmorph is an amazing library. Yeah, so I think for me, what I'm I'm going at it again. What I'm kind of realizing is doing something pure and immutable is really good under the hood. But as a surface API, as a consumption API, it's really a good thing compared to having something mutable on top. At least it looks mutable. And you can see that with, if you compare immutable JS with pure mutation, for example. If you compare immer to a plain reducer, you see that it's much more approachable, but it can still be immutable under the hood. That's my point. Okay, we're going way off here. So this is our state machine. We have state, and currently it's foo. And then we have something called onMessage, which is where we get all the messages to the state machine, where we can make our transitions. So we are going to, let's see, we are going to define some states here. Either we are authenticating, we are authenticated, and if we are authenticated, we actually have a JWT token. And we can also be unauthenticated. And if we're unauthenticated, we might have an error there. That might happen. We could be explicit and say that we have an error state. That might be a better approach, but I'm not doing that right now. But I'm rather saying we are authenticating. And let's see. And then we have the different messages. So if we are authenticating, oh, sorry, this was message type. And messages are like, yeah, so signing in, for example. So these are like, the question is, how do you name these things? So the states are like, now I am in this state. Now I am authenticating, and I'm authenticated or I'm unauthenticated. Like an event is more like, this happened. This happened in the system, like as if you didn't have control of it. It just happened. And then you have signed in, where we have a JWT token. And then we were, and this could have been the same as these ones. But for some reason, I'm not doing that. Signed out. Because these are more technical terms. And these are more like, this is what happened in the world kind of thing. I guess there are different approaches to this, but anyways. So we need signing in. And what we want to do here, maybe it's a bad idea to have this template code. Anyways, what this onMessage does is that you get a message, you look at the message, and you do something. Maybe you need to check the current state, and we're going to do that because we only want to be able to do, we only want to change the state to signing in here if we are unauthenticated, right? We can't authenticate again if we're already authenticated. So we're going to say if this current state is unauthenticated, that is when we actually go and change to authenticating. Okay? And then we're going to say on signing in. And this is going to be a private thingy on signing in. And this might seem like complete overkill. Like, you've probably done this way simpler, and I've done this way simpler before. And also thought about it in way simpler terms, but the point is that this actually causes bugs. If we don't deal with this correctly, it will cause bugs. So a typical example of that is, for example, Heroku. That's my go-to example. When you sign into Heroku, I think they still have the issue, and you click the login button, you can keep clicking it. It's crazy. Like, they haven't fixed that issue, and that's because we often think about authentication as, or we just write our code for the happy path. Like, okay, we want to sign in. The user wanted to sign in. Let's just sign in. But we really want to protect this logic so that we can only be in one of these states at any point in time. And we only want to expose properties that are valid for each of these states. And that's what we're doing here. And what we're going to look at later is how we're actually going to ensure that we dispose of everything. So if you're authenticated and suddenly you're unauthenticated, we need to dispose of a bunch of stuff that was related to you being authenticated. Like, typically we refresh the application when we sign out. And the reason we do that primarily is because we don't have control of the inner state of the application. We just want to make sure that, okay, you signed out now, we have to make sure that we don't have anything left of internal state of that authenticated state. Related authenticated state. So we'll just refresh the application after we sign out so that we're certain that happens. But we're going to be so sure about this that we don't have to refresh the application. We know that we have disposed of everything. Yes. Anyways, so what we're going to do now, when we are signing in, we are going to use the API. So let's save this. And then we are going to use the API here. And hopefully I've thought about this correctly. And we are going to say this API, and we're going to say sign in. So let's implement that. Sign in. We should probably check how we actually do this in Codesandbox. I can't remember. So API, I think it's called sign in. No. Login? No. How do we do that? How do we do that? Where do we do that? I should probably, do I have, let's see here, on initialize, GQL, show privacy. Where do we get, yes, authenticating. Are we, this might be some old states. I'm not sure if we're authenticating here. Yeah, we seem to already be authenticated there. Oh, where is this stuff? I think we have, yes, it's authenticating. Revoke token. Oh, sign in clicked. Yeah, so you can see here how we're we just have this factory where we wrap certain endpoints to ensure, like, what's the state of the app, have we loaded it, are we authenticated? If we're not authenticated, we'll deal with that. And you see that we do like document cookie right in the logic here. So we don't have this tight coupling of logic. And this is what I mean that we can do way better. Like, we do have our explicit effects and everything, but there's still tons of logic kind of spread all over. And this is something we need to deal with. But what I really just wanted to do, we have to look at this later, but we have sign in, click. How the hell does this work? Oh, there we go. Sign in button click. That's it. Actions, internal, sign in. Oh, get current user. That's the one I was looking for. Like, as you can see, this is way more complicated than just calling the API. But yeah, users current. Where are we? Here we are. Sign in. So what we want to do, we need to export interface. I think it's like current user DTO. So let's just do that. Return this fetch I current user DTO. Blah, 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 blah. Method is get. And what was the path again? It was, oh my God, I already forgot. It was users current. And I'm not like the code I'm looking at now at Codesandbox, it's open source. So you can look at that. So I'm not doing anything, looking at anything like hidden. Cool. So now we can, yeah, we don't have to do that. That's inferred. Cool. So now we're kind of getting our user there. And I don't know if that contains the JVT or something. I'm not sure how this works. We'll figure it out. Okay. So what we are going to do here is, let's see. On signing in, we are going to do that, and our auth can never be disposed of. It's just a single instance. We always have auth, right? The auth feature is always valid, so we can just do user await. This can be async. And why are you complaining? In your lib. What the hell is this? Oh. Lib. Is that lib? Like that? Are you happy now? Yeah, now you're happy. Okay, and then we can catch that with an error. So what we want to do is, when we're signing in, we want to go and grab the user, and we want to say to this thing that when we got the user, we are signed in, right? And then we have a user, and the user, yeah, we said JVT. Let's do, I don't remember where we get the JVT from. Do we get it from the user? Okay, let's just say user here, and then we'll say I current user DTO. That's what we'll get. Let's call it current user. Okay, current user is current user. Type, did I put it on the right spot? Oh, sorry. Current user DTO. Okay, so what we're doing now is we are sending, we are basically telling the machine that we're signed in with the current user. We're not explicitly setting the state, because we have to make sure that we're doing something async here. So something might have happened in between us trying to sign in the correct state and actually being signed in, right? So the point is, when we now receive signed in here, we have to check, are we actually authenticating, right? We have, this is what state machines do. They guard these transitions. They make sure that whatever message it gets in, the machine has to be in the correct state for it to actually deal with them. And this is especially useful in asynchronous code, because you don't have control that the state you were in when you executed the asynchronous code is not necessarily the state you're in when it's done executing that asynchronous code. And it might seem like crazy overkill, but there's so many bugs related to this, and you typically don't see them when you develop, because you have like a super fast internet connection and you're basically running it locally, so it's insanely fast. So getting into these race conditions, it doesn't really happen, but they do for the users out there, and it's impossible for you to infer like, oh yeah, this was a race condition here. Yeah, of course that can happen. It's really, really difficult to see these things. Anyways, so if this is the case, we want to say that we are authenticated, and we know that we have our current user on the message. Where is it? Why isn't it there? I thought, ooh, that's weird. TypeScript should have typed that. Why didn't it do that? Current user message. Why doesn't it say current user? What the hell did I do wrong? Oh, is it because of this thing? Yeah. Oh, why is this? Why do we have to explicitly say break? I don't understand that. If someone can answer that, please do. I don't understand it. Like, I would expect each case to, if it hits the case, then it breaks, right? It shouldn't continue with other cases because you have hit that case. Or maybe that's, yeah, I guess it's implemented that way, that you can actually hit multiple cases and you have to explicitly break. Anyways, my point is, yeah, I hope I'm making my point clear here. It's hard to argue that this is important, but I hope my example with Heroku and the way I explain how we are actually guarding all the transitions and ensuring the state, that it makes sense. And if this happens, we are going to send type signed out, and then we do get an error here, so we can say error message. We didn't actually allow sending an error here, but let's do that. And then if the case is signed out. Now, and the point is, you don't have to use state machines for everything, and that's really important. You just want to use it where you want to guard your states, right? So auth is definitely one of those. Another thing that we're going to look at is like the navigator, where you move between the different pages. So like you can only be on one page at a time. But an important feature of the state machine is that when you do actually move between these states, it will automatically dispose of the current state. So an example of that would be, let's say you are on a sandbox, you're on the editor. We call that the editor. That's the editor page. And then you move to the dashboard, for example. When that state transition happens in the navigator, it will dispose of the editor automatically, right? And that's really important. And we'll get more into that later. But yes, okay, cool. I guess, oh, sorry, signed out. If this state current, and we can only do this if we are actually authenticated or current equals authenticating. Well, I guess we can separate this. So if we are authenticated, well, I guess there can be an error. Can there be an error if you are authenticated and you're suddenly not authenticated anymore? let's say there's no error there. Unauthenticated. And if this state current, if we are authenticating and this happens, there is most likely an error there. Well, there is an error there. But yeah, this seems a little bit overkill. Let's just check for both of them, and we'll add an error if it's there. Let's do this. Okay, break. Cool. Let's see if I'm happy with the naming of these things. Yeah, sorry, I think I did something wrong here. I want this to be sign in. Do I? Wait a minute. I had this really nice example I did. This is the hardest thing about state machines. It's naming, like you're making naming even more complicated than it is. Like when you have a method, it's hard to name that method. And now we don't only have a method, we have a message, we have and we have a state. And we might have a method in front of that kind of triggers the event and then triggers the transition. So we're not making it easier on ourselves, that's for sure. Let's see, maybe I should write this from how it should really work. So we have like sign in, that's a public method. When we do that, we want to check if that's actually possible to let's see. We want to say this send type signing in, right? So these public methods, they are just convenience methods so that you don't have to deal with the internal state machine API. So the state machine is truly something private to the feature. You still just use methods you expose, but using the internal state machine API, you ensure that whatever the intention from the outside is, it's being dealt with correctly inside the feature. So you want to sign in, and you can do that whenever you want. And then it just sends an event that, okay, we're signing in. Maybe we should be even more explicit. We could say like sign in requested, for example. Maybe that would be better. Yeah, I think that sign in, yeah, this makes it, let's do that. Sign in requested. And then signed in, signed out. Cool. Yeah. So let's go through this. So we have a state machine because we want to ensure our authenticated states, right? And we want to allow some feature to call sign in. But when that happens, we don't start signing in or anything. We just say to the state machine, hey, we requested a sign in. And then that goes into the state machine. We deal with that request and we check, are we actually unauthenticated? Do we want to handle this message? If that's not the case, if some feature called sign in when we were we're already authenticating, or we were already authenticated, nothing would happen, which is exactly what state machines do so well. But in this case, we're unauthenticated. We run some logic related to that. Let's call it on sign in requested. And we returned that we are now currently authenticating. And now this is spinning, like we're doing something async. And we're grabbing a user. And now we're telling the state machine that, hey, now we are signed in with a user. And again, it goes into the state machine. it explicitly says, okay, are we actually authenticating now? Because if you were moved into unauthenticated, or you were for some reason already authenticated, then we shouldn't deal with it. Then this is an invalid sign-in, right? And then we return, okay, we are actually authenticating. Let's return a new state authenticated with the actual user. And the same goes for like signed out. So we can do sign out here as well. And we're just requesting. Maybe this is the key. Like these events should typically be whenever it's something the user does, you can say requested. It helps. So yeah, sign out requested. Type. Oh my god. Okay, we're going way over time. This is kind of fun to do. So, and it's important for Codesandbox to explore these concepts. So we can spend some time with this. Sign out requested. And then we need to actually deal with that. Sign out requested. Oh. Sign out requested. There we are. And then we can only do that if the current state of this machine is that we are authenticated. And then we say this on sign out requested. We run that async logic, and then we don't really do anything more. We're still, well, we could have like unauthenticating if we really wanted to do that, and maybe we should, because that might take a little bit of time. But one thing I want to bring up before I forget it. So why are we doing it imperatively? If you compare this to xstate, for example, you can do this declaratively instead. And how should I explain this? So the thing is that it's really cool how I think expressing this declaratively is a really good idea. I think it definitely, if you read the code, you see it much more clearly in a declarative manner. That's just the general rule for declarative code. You instantly kind of see it. You build this mental image of what is happening. Because in xstate, you separate the logic from, or the implementation of the actions and stuff from kind of a description of the transitions and the guarding and everything. But at the same time, you have to, that declarative definition has a lot of quirks because there's so many different ways to deal with this. So basically, the declarative thing with transitions and states in xstate is this onMessage function or method. So here we have one method where you can do whatever you want. But in xstate, you have this restricted declarative description, which is great. Like, it's great because on one side, it ensures that you always do the right thing. You can do something wrong here, right? But with that declarative description, it kind of helps you to do the right thing. But at the same time, you can do so many different things. And maybe there's a thing you want to do that you just can't do with that declarative description. And since we're in this imperative world using object-oriented programming, we have classes and stuff like that. This is kind of how you would express a state machine in that pattern or in that way of programming. It would look, it wouldn't look good to kind of mix the declarative description here with all its complexities when you can just do it imperatively like this. So in this world, I think it's cleaner to do it this way, and you have the freedom. Like, if you want to use xstate, you can just use xstate inside one of the features for that matter. But yeah, so that's the reasoning at least. Blah, 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 on sign out requested. Let's do this later. Okay, I want to do one more thing. So let's get back to, is anyone still sticking around? Yeah, that's nice of you. Oh, there's a question there. Oh yeah, like a resource. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so one thing I don't like about API, which you bring up, Ruben, is that it will become very large. Because all the different resources will be there. You will have to type all of them, and then the type is separated from the method of actually grabbing it or dealing with it. So this concept of repositories, yeah, I really like that. Yeah, because that's like, you're not exposing like an endpoint which only has these low-level post get things, and you're not building this huge monolith of an API. So yeah, I really like that. I think we should change it to that. Repository. Yeah, I'm not used to that term. Okay, let's think about it. I'll think about it. I think we should do it. I'm not ready to do an actual change here, because we should wrap this up. But yeah, let's do that next time. But what I want to show you is that, as we said, our oh, by the way, this on message, this should be reactive. It should be an action. I need to, okay, sorry. Let's fix that quickly. Oh, oh, this sucks. Yeah, because it's protected and then it's not part of the type. But it no, wait, sorry. It doesn't need to be that. My bad. Sorry. Yeah, maybe we should, like, if it has the protected keyword, we can indicate that somehow. Like, this is protected means that this is something that the library has added for you, or is a library thing. It's not exposed on the typing, like publicly, but it's not private either, because there are internal things in the tool that's using it. So if it was private, as you can see here, if it was private, it would be like, oh, this is not used, but it is actually used, which is why it's protected. Anyways, sorry. So what we're going to do now, in the auth, we're able to call, these are private. There we go. Yeah, so protected should not show up here either. That we can fix. Sorry. Reactive app. This is in our AST utils. Get properties, I believe. Oh, wasn't it there? Oh my god. Get properties. There we go. Get properties, or modifier, what's it called? Protected keyword. There we go. So if we go back here to our Codesandbox refactor, let's stop this one and then run it again. Oh, why didn't that work? Should ignore protected keyword. Oh, sorry, this is properties. We also have get methods. There we go. And let's try again. Whoop, now it's gone. Great. Okay, so we have sign in, and when we sign in, we want to use the API. But the API needs to use auth to figure out if it should include a JWT token or not. So what we're going to do is Oh, I think we need the node types. npm install types node. I think that's where kind of fetch comes from, at least the typing, which is kind of weird because it's a browser thing. But yeah, let's see. Isn't it? That's weird. Oh, is it because we... I don't know. Why isn't it window.fetch? Oh. TypeScript fetch not typed. Basic. Well, I mean the typing. Node fetch. But this should just work. This is weird. Anyways, let's not think about that. Let's rather think about how we want to create a circular thing here. So we have auth here, and now we want to make auth a dependency of the API again, which is possible. So now we have auth here, and we can actually, in our private fetch here now, so we can really isolate the logic, which I really, really like. So we did have the typing here. Where did the typing go? Is it because I have ES? What are the ES? Isn't it like next or something? ES6, ES next? Is that the reason? Restart ES server. I have no idea. We didn't have okay, I'll deal with that later. Anyways, so we have headers here. And what we can do now, we can just say this auth state current equals authenticated. If that's the case, we are going to put a JVT there. We're going to grab it from state, state. And now it knows that, okay, since we're authenticated, we do have a current user. We don't have a JVT there, but let's just add that for fun. If we don't have that, we don't have any headers. And now let's just, oh, sorry. This would be, yeah, sorry. And this should be like, bearer. Oh shit, what was the thing? What was the thing? API factory, yeah, of course, authorization bearer. There we go. Okay, so that's actually it. So now what we've been able to do now is by doing this, we're allowing the auth feature to use an endpoint in the API to do sign-in, which is important because the API is responsible for creating these requests to the server. And the environment is telling us what the API, how the API endpoint is attached to the path that we're using for the API. So this makes sense. But then again, the API needs to know if it's going to add the JVT token or not, which the auth is responsible for. And now we're actually allowed ourselves to do this, which is cool. And we should try this. Maybe we can try it. Let's see if it works. Hopefully it works and didn't do anything wrong here. That would be so sad. Let's see. Let's add a inner button. Isn't it like on click, sign in, something like that, and then function window dot sign in. I guess we can get auth. 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 I have no idea what's going to happen now. Let's just try it for fun. I think maybe this will work. Oh, did I do anything wrong? Hello world. Document query selector. Why isn't there a button here? No errors. What the hell? Where did our onClick go? Okay, I have no idea what happened there. Let's remove this stuff. What the hell? Is it this stuff that's cause? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Anyways, let's just do document query selector button add event listener. Oh, probably doing this. Maybe we should add some React stuff here. Click auth sign in, something like that. Or I guess we can use H1. Let's just console log signing, or I guess we'll see it in the editor if something happened. Okay. Okay, so what we're seeing now is that we are, well, we're actually authenticating. It should be unauthenticated, I guess. So let's change that. Unauthenticated. That's our initial state. And then, yeah, so we are unauthenticated. And now, well, we don't need the button. We can actually just click it here. Let's change it into like an action. And then let's try to run it. Okay, so we got failed to fetch. Okay, I guess that's fair. But anyways, it was actually running. So I'm not sure what actually happened there. Yeah, from origin has been blocked by course. Yeah, I'm not sure how we are actually able to run localhost against production. So I'm not sure how that actually works. So I'll figure that out for next time. But yeah, okay, this was a long session, but at least we got into a lot of stuff. And I hope this, at least the reasoning makes sense. You don't, of course, don't have to agree with it. And maybe you have other ideas on how to approach it, other experiences. Maybe you haven't met a project that really needs to deal with these kinds of challenges. But yeah, I think it's good to talk about it no matter. So hopefully it's useful, and tomorrow I'll make sure that this thing actually works, and then we can move on, and we can explore this repositories idea, which is really interesting. And yeah, I don't know what the next step will be. Maybe we should look at the navigator. So we kind of add this front concept of loading the different pages of Codesandbox, and we can dive into the editor first. We also need to properly handle the authentication. We have some cookie logic and stuff that we need to have. Maybe we can look into that as well. Cool. That's it for now. Bye, and have a nice day.